I wonder if I should do an intro to these things. Like, hey there, my fellow casuals. Welcome to Filthy Casuals channel. This is your host, Filthy Casual. Nah, fuck that. I want to talk about Trapped in a Dating Sim, or Mobuseka, and what happens after the anime, because I really enjoyed it, and I watched the first 5 episodes, and then I went and bought all the light novels, and immediately read all of them. There's 6 right now that are officially published in English, and then the fan translations that are caught up to the Japanese versions go to Light Novel Volume 10. And I think it's actually getting pretty close to the end of the series from the way that things are going. But anyway, so I don't know if this show is going to get a Season 2 or not. So I want to talk about what I think Season 2 would be, which is essentially just Book 3. Season 1 covered Book 1 and 2. And Book 3 has a lot of stuff that happens. So I could easily see it just being its own season. And also because of where it ends. So this will be spoilers for what happens after the anime for Season 1. But I figured for anime-only people, you might want to know what happens. And if you're not a light novel reader, the manga right now is only like 2 chapters into the next light novel. And it's monthly. So it'll probably be a couple years before it even gets done with Book 3. And also Book 3 kind of ends the first arc of the series. And I like actually where it ends because if it was the end of the series, I'd be completely fine with it. But the way that it ends, it's also completely reasonable for it to keep going. It doesn't feel like one of those things where they had a certain story in mind and made money and just kept going or rebooted it or whatever. So if you're here, like and subscribe and all that shit. I'm going to go through the book now and essentially what I think Season 2 would be. So if it never gets made, then there's no spoilers. If you plan on reading the light novels, then it's spoilers for Book 3, obviously. And if it does get made, then this will probably spoil all of Season 2. So there you go. Alright, the anime leaves off with Leon and the students of the Academy in Holfort protecting their ship from the attack by the Principality of Phanos. Leon captured their princess Hertrude and let the Black Knight Vandal go because he didn't want to kill anybody. And also, this is good for me because I can actually pronounce all the names in this one, unlike the more Japanese ones or the ones that have Japanese characters where all the names are not something I'm familiar with. So, the book, right in the prologue, picks up with a pretty funny scene for how messed up this world is that Leon lives in. He got promoted again to Viscount, and now he's getting love letters, and they're not really love letters. Obviously, they're women who are just after his status, pretty reflective of real life. These women who are writing these letters are giving conditions for marriage, like they need a manor in the capital for them and all their servants, which are essentially their lovers, financial support for all their lovers and concubines and slaves. Luxian points out that women actually outnumber men in this world, so men should have a lot more say since they're short in supply. But that's not how it works. And this is something I'll actually give an explanation for near the end of the book, because Leon finds out. So, and also in the dub, they say Luxian or Luxian, but I think Luxian sounds better. And Olivia calls him Lux, which I think makes more sense than Lux. Maybe I am butchering one name still. Anyway, we cut to the girl Carla Falwayne, who is the one who tried to set Leon up with the pirates on orders from her Earl. And now she's an outcast at the academy, obviously, because that Earl got ostracized from the nobility. Marie wants to piss off Leon as much as she can because she hates him. So she invites Carla to be in her entourage, now that she's officially the saint. Marie finds out that her parents got into a shitload of debt that she's now responsible for. And she kind of has these thoughts where she's wondering if she just has bad luck with men. And she references her previous life, which we also find out more about in this book. So we cut, and Leon is strolling around with Olivia, who's already confessed to him at the end of the last fight. Olivia is probing to see if he's interested in these women that are now sending him letters and stuff. And he says that he just needs her and Angie, and really avoids talking about his feelings at all costs with Olivia or Angie. They run into his friend Raymond, and there's a sign for people to be the saint's bodyguard, and they get titles and stuff. And Angie shows up saying that she has an important message for Leon, and that's the end of the prologue. So for chapter 1, we start out with kind of the politics, And what it boils down to is this character that gets introduced, Malcolm Foe Frampton, who opposes Duke Redgrave, which is Angie's dad, and the house that supports Leon. And he's been gaining a lot of support, this Marquess. So he uses this leverage to bully them into making Leon the Saint's bodyguard to essentially screw him over. We cut to Leon's ship with Marie and the 5 idiot lovers that she has for her reverse harem. And her elf servant Kyle is with them, and he's a little shit talker. Angie and Olivia come because Angie is excited about the prospect of an adventure at this elf island that they're going to. And Olivia is really excited because of all the history that she might learn about. Marie tries to boss Leon around on his ship, and he pretty much just tells her to fuck off. So they land, and Marie is throwing a tantrum because she wants to find the treasure to pay off some of her debt. And obviously when I say the 5 idiot lovers, I mean Julius, Brad, Greg, Chris, and Jilk. So we find out on the ship that the politicians have really screwed Leon over here because they also sent Princess Hertrude from the Principality of Phanos, who's the princess that he captured. So he's in charge of her and the Saint. The 5 idiot lovers start calling him Commander since he's Marie's bodyguard, and he's just miserable. Kyle is acting like a little shithead when they get there. We find out that this is his hometown. They run into his mom, and her name is Eumeria, and he acts like an asshole to her too. And we find out why later. So they go to the village leader's manor to get permission to go into the dungeon. The village leader wants to say no, but then the head elder shows up and says it's okay. And she's a fortune teller of some sort, and mentions that if they go in there, they'll face the wrath of the Demon King. So they're all kind of guessing who the Demon King is. And Leon thinks it could be Prince Julius. She gives them permission to enter. These ruins are pretty much completely empty as the elves said they would be. And there's not much to do there. Marie throws a fit and runs off. And Leon chases after her so that he can talk to her, because he wants to know if she was also reincarnated. Leon catches her and she admits that she's reincarnated, and the floor collapses underneath him. He realizes that she didn't finish the game and doesn't understand the responsibilities of the Saint that happen at the end of the game. We go back to Angie and the 5 idiots, and they're speculating about if Bartford or Leon is going to make a move on Marie, and Angie and Olivia get upset. Angie, obviously, because it's already happened to her once. They realize he might try to kill her and freak out. And I love how much of a dick Leon is, that they would consider that he might kill the Saint just because he's petty. I think he's a really good... I guess he's an anti-hero. I think he's just kind of an asshole who still does heroic things, but either way. He doesn't really do villainous things, even if he gives kind of nefarious reasons for doing good things. So, you can make of it what you will, I guess. But he's the main reason I like the series so much. So, after their fall, Marie has a dream. She's dreaming of her and her brother when they were kids, and it's pretty obvious at this point that it's Leon. Leon gets annoyed because he's shooting down monsters around her, and she's not helping at all. But they're not regular monsters because they're not dissolving like the other ones do. So that's the end of chapter 1. For chapter 2, I think there's 13 chapters, by the way. So we go to chapter 2. Angie and the others find the hole where they fell, and they go get a rope to go after them, and they can hear the gunshots from Leon. The village leader jumps into the hole with no hesitation, and Angie thinks it's suspicious. And it's revealed here that Marie's healing magic isn't as good as Olivia's, because the pain doesn't go away immediately like it does with hers, and Leon calls her a fraud. Luxian throws Leon under the bus because he stole Aragan's, his armor, which should have been Olivia's. And Luxian and Leon's relationship is so funny, because Luxian is just such an asshole to Leon, and every chance he gets he's proposing genocide of the new humans. So Leon kills the monsters, and they find these elf scientists. The elves think that they used to rule the world, and that they're the superior race because they created all the other races. And Luxian explains that actually elves were created by humans for battle because they could live forever and use magic. They run into another AI like Luxian here. The village leader shows up and wants to kill him and hide the evidence. This AI in the lab is a female, and she uses the defense system to shoot all the monsters they created in the lab. Leon makes them all look like bitches with Luxian, and then they tie them all up. The AI says she's going to self-destruct the lab, which is what Luxian also said he was going to do the first time he met Leon. Leon takes the treasures, and Luxian loses his mind because it's a part of the new humans and he thinks it's evil. So the AI self-destructs the lab, and then Luxian brings out his main body in stealth mode, and a beam of light comes down and destroys the entire area there. And the elves think that this is the Demon King punishment. So it ended up being Luxian. One of the treasures is a black and spiky armor fragment that Luxian views as evil. Princess Hertrude wants it from Leon. Leon, Angie, Marie, and Olivia head to speak to the elder, while Luxian bitches about the armor fragment that they found. The head elder tells Marie that she's going to be alone forever. She tells Hertrude that she'll find her fated partner soon. She tells Angie and Olivia that they're protected by a hero and that their fates are intertwined because they diverted from the paths intended for them, and that someone has taken their burdens away from them. Leon is told that he will lose something precious, and he will have a difficult decision to make. And Leon throws a tantrum about how bad his fortune is, and then Olivia and Angie had to pull him off the elder because she's an old lady. So heading to chapter 3, they're back on Leon's boat, and we find out that Leon took Eumeria to be his servant at his dad's house. We find out that the elves essentially view beauty of each other by their magical aura, and she's impure for some reason because her magic is defective, and also because she made Kyle with a human man. Leon says that he took her so that she could be close to Kyle, but he kind of justifies it so that he can maintain his persona as saying that it'll be effective blackmail, because the reason the elves are slaves is because it's believed that they can't get the women pregnant. So obviously if they could get the women pregnant, their value would plummet, even if it's rare. So Eumeria is described as very nice and sweet and a bit of a klutz, and Kyle is still a little shithead to her. Olivia tells him to be nice to his mom, and then he cries and runs off. And the special magic that she can do helps plants grow really fast, which seems like it would be valuable, but they just don't like her. And we find out that Kyle will live a human lifespan, so essentially his mother is going to have to watch him go from birth to death, and she's not going to age, or she'll age very little. Leon goes to console Kyle, and he gets mad at Leon and says that he just got Eumeria because she's hot and has huge boobs. They resolve their issues, kinda, because Leon realizes that even though Kyle's angry at his mom, he obviously loves her, and Kyle also warns him to keep an eye on Hertrude, because she keeps exploring his ship and stuff. Leon takes the black armor fragment to the deck, and Luxian insists on destroying it. When Leon touches it, he realizes that it's alive, and this is one of the new human weapons. Hertrude shows up and tries to buy it, and Leon tells her that he dropped it off the ship. She throws a tantrum. So Leon goes to report his trip to the royalty and gets harassed by more bitchy women about his money and the prospect of marriage. He runs into Queen Mylene, and she tells him that because Marie's family got her into a bunch of debt and he's her personal bodyguard, that they want him responsible for it. Essentially, this is just the Marquess nobles, the ones that are on his side. They want to screw Leon over, take his money, take his power, take his lost items. They don't trust him. She tells him she was the one who pushed for him to become a Viscount, and we get a funny scene here where he says he wants her again. He's like kind of messing with her, but kind of serious. We get a cutaway here to Meowler, or Meowler. It's Miauler. Say it how you want. And this is Jenna, who's Leon's sister. Meowler is Jenna's demi-human lover, and he sneaks into Leon's room to plant evidence, and they're bitching that Kyle wouldn't help. Obviously, Kyle does have some kind of, respect for Leon, even if he doesn't admit it. And we find out later, well, not much later, in just a minute here, we'll find out that this is evidence to make him look like a traitor to the Phanos Kingdom. So we go to the next day. Leon's having a tea party. Deirdre, Foul Roseblade, who Leon met when they defended the ship, she has the drill hair, and Clarice via Atlee, who was engaged to Jilk, are both with him and telling him to switch sides away from Duke Redgrave, who's Angie's dad. And they also reveal that Marquez Frampton, who hates Leon, has been meeting with Princess Hertrude. And a bunch of soldiers bust in and arrest Leon as a traitor. Angie rushes to Hertrude's room to confront her about Leon's arrest, and Hertrude shits on Leon for not being able to kill people in battle, even though he's a knight. And Hertrude says that she would do anything for revenge, because of what Holford did to the women and children of Thanos, where they essentially just went through and killed people. Or the Knights come in and take Angie away since they're all bought off by the Marquez. Leon is back in his room and they reveal the planted documents. He gets taken away and Mjolnir is smirking at him and all the girls are shitting on him again that were just proposing to him. So we go to the next chapter. Marquez, Frampton, and Gertrude are visiting the palace vault. Gertrude wants a piece of the black spiky armor that they have in the vault. The Marquez says for the exchange, they'll cede some territory to Thanos because his house or his family or whatever you want to say is one of the ones on the border that's supposed to keep Thanos out in exchange for allowing him to take credit for negotiating peace with Thanos. And essentially this would increase his status and be a power grab. And, in return, Thanos would get land and she would get this piece of black spiky armor. And she's thinking to herself, and she never has any intention of honoring this agreement. We find out from their discussion that Queen Mylene has kept Leon from execution, but they took his lost items, which are his ship, the partner, and his armor Aragans. So we cut to the Black Knight. This is the guy that Leon beat with the scar on his face. He let him live at the end of last season. He's getting the black spiky armor piece that Gertrude negotiated for. And we also get introduced to Hertrauda, Hertrauda. Hertrauda, whatever. She's the second princess, and she can also control monsters because she has a flute. We go to Leon in his cell. Prince Julius comes to call him a traitor and says that they're on the brink of war. He leaves, and then Gertrude comes, and she keeps asking him to switch sides to Thanos. Leon gets taken to a meeting with Angie's brother Gilbert and Queen Mylene, and he learns that this is essentially all his fault. Prince Julius losing his title made the Redgrave House look weaker, and then driving off the Principality of Thanos with just one ship put a target on his back from the Marquez and his allies. So everybody's scared of him, essentially. We find out that they sent him straight to jail, essentially to protect him from assassination and stuff. Angie got freed by her brother and father, and she goes to plead for Leon to be released, and her dad says that without his lost items, he's worthless. And Angie storms out, pissed off. We see Angie's dad, Vincent, after she leaves, talking to her brother Gilbert, and he says that he feels bad for keeping her out of the loop, but she's too volatile, and he just wishes that she would acknowledge how she feels about Leon. And he says that they sort of got lucky for the status of their house because of how successful Leon is. And Angie obviously is in love with him. It's good that they didn't switch to support the second prince, which is something that comes up later in the series. We cut to Angie and Livia together, and there's a warship hanging over the academy for protection. Livia says that she'll do anything to help Leon, so her and Angie go beg Marie for help. Marie is relishing this and says if they prostrate before her in public, that she'll save Leon because she knows that Angie's way too proud and would never do it. And then we cut and they're doing the Dogeza or whatever, prostrating themselves before her in public with their face on the ground on their hands and knees. So Marie panics because she doesn't have a way to save Leon. She just thought they would never do it. And everyone is shaming Angie and Livia and talking about how they can't believe they ever followed her and stuff. All the catty shit they've been doing. One of Marie's followers puts her foot on the back of Angie's head, and then eventually the 5 idiots step in and say it's enough. Livia talks to Angie and says that she could have done it without her, and Angie says that she'll probably be disowned now. And Livia gets a little bit insecure when she realizes how strong Angie's feelings for Leon are. We cut to Hertrauda, who's ready with her flute for the war, and she has the same power as her sister. And then we go to chapter 5, which is called The Fake Saint. And we start with Leon sitting in his cell, and he's just kind of sulking about the people trying to bribe him to get control of his armor and ship. He mentions that the ground keeps rumbling. And Luxian is trying to figure out his motivations and suggest annihilating the new humans again and just kind of starting over with his own harem and stuff if he wants. Lux suggests genocide every chance he gets. So Leon gets a visit from all 5 of Marie's idiots. Jill, Greg, Brad, Chris, and Julius. All of them promise to break him out, and all of them fail, obviously, because they're stupid and incompetent. The Principality of Thanos is on the move, and Marquez Frampton has a meeting, and he thinks it's essentially just, essentially staged because he agreed to it. until his men show up and Thanos is supposed to step down. Which obviously, we know that they're not going to, but that's his plan. So we go back to Leon, who's been in jail for days, and his guard leaves and soldiers show up to try to poison him by offering him liquor. Chris and Jill come in and beat their asses and save him. They run out together, and Brad and Greg are waiting on the path for him, and they all go to Julius. And the king surrounds them because they were on the way to rescue Leon. The royalty, along with Angie's dad, explain that Thanos has touched down in the mainland, and Leon pretty much just finds out that Holford is screwed. Mylene explains that the temple used Marie to send aid to the Marquez, and they sent 200 ships and only 10 made it back. So we get a flashback here of what actually happened, and Marie is leading the fleet. She fights off some monsters, and then we get a cut to Hertrauda, who looks like shit, and says that they're going to summon the Sky and Sea Guardians, is what Thanos calls them. Holford just refers to them as giants. And these two giants are going to try to sink the continent that Holford is on. Because in this world, every continent is floating with these suspension stones, so they could be sunk if they destroy them. There's these two giant monsters. Marie freaks out and says that she's not even the real saint and runs. And goes and hides. So they have to retreat with the ships they have left. So we go back, and they're asking Leon if he can win. Or we come back to the present time, and they're asking Leon if he can win. He says he doesn't know, and the final bosses in the game just keep reviving over and over until Olivia uses her power. And we find out that there's a royal lost item, and it's a ship that can only be powered by love because it's a Otome game. And in the game, it was Olivia and then whoever her romantic partner is. So Mylene says that Marie's execution has been announced by the temple because she is the fake saint. And Leon waits for the royalty to have their meeting, and Luxian tells him that there's two giants. And Leon's contemplating if he should just run. His tea master comes in when Leon's contemplating running, and his tea master says that he's going to stay no matter what because he's chivalrous, essentially, and that's his duty. Leon accepts that he's going to have to become the commander-in-chief to save Holford, and says he would feel guilty leaving it to Luxian, and Luxian warns of more shaking and communication issues and stuff. Then we go to chapter 6, which is called Bonds. So Leon tells the queen that he wants complete control because his tea master suggested that he appeal to her, and he pressures her because no one else can defeat Thanos or the giant, and he also demands the royal ship and says to bring Marie and the 5 idiots. Mylene agrees, but tells him that because he's so young and an upstart, that no one is going to listen to or respect him. We cut to the academy, and the girls are losing their minds and begging even low-ranking nobles to take them with them because everyone's fleeing. Leon had gathered his friends, and thanks to the contracts that they all signed, he bullies them into forming a small fleet for him. Because their contracts were the ships that he gave them were really customized, and only he could fix them. So, he kind of forced their hand, obviously. And I do love how underhanded he is, that he had these contracts written like this, just in case a situation arose where he would need them, to be able to force them to help him. We cut, and Luxian is fetching Olivia and Angie. They agree to go to the palace to help Leon. Leon runs into Nyx at the port, and his sister Jenna and her slave Mjolnir that set him up are there. Nyx says that their dad is there to pick him up and to help people evacuate. And Leon explains the situation to his dad. His dad's name is Balcus, or Balcus. Balcus. Balcus, I guess. And his dad says that he should just run away. And Leon knows that Mjolnir set him up because of Luxian's surveillance, obviously. So Zola, who's technically Balcus's wife and total cunt that tried to sell Leon off in episode 1, shows up, and she wants to be let on the ship with all her bitchy friends and slaves. As Balcus goes to greet him outside, he grabs Mjolnir by his scruff and drags him along, and he yells at him for betraying Leon. And Leon says that he's never seen his dad yell it before, and he always thought he was weak and spineless. And his dad drags Mjolnir off the ship and then cuts his fucking head off. It's a pretty awesome scene in the book when you consider how kind of tame his dad has been, or, mild-mannered, or whatever you want to say. So he tells Zola to hand over Rutart, who's their oldest son and the heir to their house, because they're going to war. And she refuses. And they get into a pretty heated exchange, and she says that he's not even Balkis's son. And he says, I figured as much, goodbye, and just leaves. So it's a pretty badass scene for Leon's dad, after he's been kind of bullied the entire time up to this point. And I really enjoy this scene every time that I read it, which is now 3 or 4 times. So Leon goes back to the palace, and the fleet they have left is gathered, which is not much, obviously. The tremors are getting worse, and Leon mentions Livia can speak directly to people's hearts, and he goes to get Marie and the idiots who are under arrest. So Marie's execution has only been delayed, and she has a meltdown at the idiots, but they all still defend her anyway. Angie and Livia show up to meet him, and he asks for a minute alone with Marie. So we get another dream of her brother in her past life, who's Leon, and she says when she came back from her trip where he died, they found out everything and never really liked her again. And she's talking about her brother in her sleep, and when she wakes up, Leon says if he's related to you, he must be a scumbag. Which could be a true statement, I guess, depending on how you view Leon. So they argue, and he asks why she took the Saint's power knowing that Olivia needed it. And she says her brother finished it for her and then died. And this is when they realize that they used to be brother and sister. Luxien says that he actually believes them now about their reincarnation, because he didn't believe Leon before. So that's the end of Chapter 6. Chapter 7 is called Destiny. We go to Leon and Marie talking about their past lives. And she talks about how her boyfriend beat her. And by the time she realized how bad it was getting, she woke up in this world. And how she had a kid that her parents took for her because she couldn't stay out of bad relationships, essentially. And she keeps calling him Bubby and asking him to save her. Leon gets called to the royal chamber, and Marie runs away to the rooftop, where Olivia chases her. And Marie says that she can have all the boys and her slave, but give back her brother Leon. And Olivia slaps her in the face and says Leon's not an object. Kyle and Carla come find her, and Olivia is jealous that even in this situation, Marie has 2 people who are loyal to her, and Olivia feels like she's completely alone. So Angie sees Olivia upset and tells her that she loves Leon too, and Olivia admits that she already told Leon and that he kind of blew her off. So Angie suggests that they corner him and make him answer. Back in the royal chamber, Leon is appointed commander-in-chief, and he has a pretty awesome line here that actually comes back to bite him in the ass later. The king says, this is a quote, "There are those who would belittle you for your youth. I'm sure there are those who distrust your lack of experience. However, only you possess the power to lead us to victory. Tell me, Viscount Barford, can you win?" And in response, Leon says, "If that is what your majesty desires, yes." And I'll explain why it bites him in the ass later, but it's pretty funny. And it's very petty. So Marquez Frampton protests this appointment and has a tantrum, and then Leon pulls out a gun. The Duke's men surround the Marquez, and then Leon talks a bunch of shit to him about how much of a traitor he is, and he plays a recording of his sedition, shows a bunch of letters that Luxien copied from him, and relays a message from Gertrude to let him know that he was useless. And he really goes over the top being an asshole here, which is, I think, fair considering they tried to kill him and repeatedly screw him over. But it's very reminiscent of his duel with the 5 idiots. So we cut, and Leon is sulking to Luxien that all of this responsibility is on him, and he decides to prioritize evacuation and tells Luxien go use his main body to deal with the giant at sea. Essentially, he'll have like a spin-off, dumbed-down version of Luxien to support him because of the communication issues caused by these monsters. We go to the Royal Lost Item ship, and to power it, it requires the power of true love. And they have to also be royal family or heroic descendants. Livia meets this qualification in the game because of her ancestors. So we get a pretty funny scene here where 2 people step on the pad on the ship, and this is how you're supposed to power it up. And it shouts out love scores up to 100. And the king only gets 25, and Mylene gets 58. So she gets pissed off at him. Even though it's a political marriage, obviously. Luxien sends for repairs, since the ship hasn't been used since some ancient couple's honeymoon. And Marie and Julius go first, Julius gets 90, Marie gets 17. And this happens with all 5 idiots where they get scores in this range, and Marie gets scores at about that range. And they all just kind of play it off as they'll earn her love one day. And Leon's like cracking up and really enjoying all this until Olivia and Angie grab him and drag him up there. And the king and the others laugh and push him along to get back at him. But before he can get on the pad, Olivia and Angie step on the pad together and they both get scores of 120 points. And I busted out laughing the first time that I read this, because Leon essentially bursts into tears and runs away crying about being a background character. Alright, so chapter 8 is called Into Battle. Leon is off hiding and waiting for the ships to be ready, and he's shocked about Angie and Olivia. We cut to Queen Mylene talking to Princess Gertrude, and she shows her the actual history of what happened. And essentially, Thanos wouldn't stop attacking Holford, so eventually they had no choice but to put a stop to it by force. Gertrude is in denial and says she won't try to stop the war, and that she doesn't even have the capability if she wanted to. Thanos launches an attack on the palace, and then Leon gets into Arrogans to fight him off. And we get a nice character moment here where the enemy's talking shit about the fiendish knight, who's Leon. I've also seen translations where it's the scumbag knight. I think either one works. The enemy's talking shit about Leon because they think he won't kill anybody. Because last time he refused to kill anybody. But now he has no choice, so he starts just fucking cutting them down. It's pretty brutal. We cut to Julius and Jilk, and Jilk is getting an armor to fight, but Mylene tells Julius no and he pouts. Angie and Livia go board the lost item ship that only they can operate, and Julius begs Angie for an armor, but she tells him that it's not up to her. The Duke's ships don't follow her orders. And we get a good character moment here too for Angie, where she realizes that she doesn't even care enough about Julius to be mad at him anymore. She's really just concerned about Leon's safety. And we cut to the formerly mustached man from Thanos that Leon fought in the other battle, who's supposed to save Gertrude, but has no intention of doing so. And Leon shows up and blows up his ship. And Clarice, who also likes Leon, is on the ground. And Leon protects her from an enemy armor. And he also saves Deirdre from an enemy armor. We cut to Leon inside Aragon's cockpit, and he says that he's puking for the umpteenth time. What you're supposed to infer from it is that the killing people is making him sick, like psychologically. So we cut to Luxian, and he blows up the sea giant, and it just regenerates. And this is what Leon meant. At one point in the book, he says that you won't lose, but I don't think you can win either. Essentially, Luxian can just keep blowing him up, but it'll just keep regenerating. So we go to chapter 9, called The Demon. We see the Black Knight, or Vandal, that Leon previously fought, and he was the only one who could use the demonic suit that Gertrude got from the vault. These demonic armor pieces that the new humans use kill the user. A lot of times they kill the user so fast that they can't even actually use it. The Royal Lost Item ship is white and deploys, and Leon sees the Black Knight flying toward the palace. And obviously he breaks in with no issue because he's the Black Knight, and he rescues Gertrude. And she's upset that he used the demonic suit because it's going to kill him. And we get an implication from her here that summoning the Guardians or the Giants will cost you your life. Like, that's the cost of summoning something so massive. We cut to Leon. Nix and his dad are asking about the situation. He tells Marie to fight for her life like it depends on it, because it actually does. Because he's, always got to be a little bit of a dick. The 4 idiots who aren't Julius land on the deck to protect her. And the Weiss, which is what Luxian names the royal ship, the lost item, with Livia and Angie. So that ship will be Marie, Livia, and Angie. During their reunion, a sparkling white armor shows up and a masked man gets out. And it's obviously Julius, and Leon and Marie recognize it right away. But everyone else just doesn't notice for some reason. Leon's annoyed, but eventually he just lets him join the other 4 idiots because he's worried he'll run off and do something dangerous. The 5 idiots' job is to protect the Weiss, which is Angie and Livia and Marie's ship. So we go to Angie and Livia, and a ball like Luxian shows up, but it's white. And this is Clear. Cleare. I've also seen it translated as Claire, but I think Clear makes more sense because Olivia calls it Cleary. But either way, it's the AI that they found on the Elf Island. This is the research AI that they found on the Elf Island. So she's a research AI, and Angie uses her to call Leon to confess her feelings, but Julius and the other idiots interrupt. The 5 idiots and Marie were sent on a small ship from the partner to the Weiss, like I mentioned earlier. So we get a little cut here where the king is looking for his mask and armor, and this is what Julius stole to go fight, and he's bitching to Mylene about it because he wants to be a hero. So chapter 10 is Olivia's power, and Gertrude and Hertrauda are reunited. Hertrauda is asking her sister not to summon the Land Guardian because that would be the third one summoned, and they don't really need it, and it would kill her. And this is where we find out that they want the suspension stone, and this will allow them to expand their territory if they get it. We cut to Leon, who's about to face down the fleet and the giant, and he encounters the armors and ships from Phanos, and they call him Fiendish Knight or Scumbag Knight, like I mentioned before. So he uses the partner to keep the giant at bay and attacks the fleet himself. We cut to Angie and Olivia. They're both really sad, essentially, about the battle, and it aches in their chest, so they start praying, and Marie joins them. And this is what we find out Olivia's true power is. She can hear the voices of the people dying on the battlefield, and it really connects with her emotionally, so it really upsets her. And Angie can feel it too because they're connected by the ship's power, pretty much, by the power of love. So Olivia releases her power using the ship, and the battle comes to a complete halt. Leon can hear her thoughts in his head, and she's asking everyone to stop fighting. And the knockoff Luxian says that a psychic attack has been detected, and the giants disappear, and we cut to Hertrauda, who can feel Olivia's feelings, and she's upset because she died for nothing. And Gertrude sobs as she dies in her arms. Vandal, the Black Knight, is unaffected because of the demonic suit that he's wearing, so he decides to go after the ship with Livia and Angie on it, and Leon sees him, but he can't get there in time. Luxian, who's fighting the sea giant as the giants disappear, because once Olivia does this, the giants fade away and die or disappear or whatever they do. And the Black Knight cuts through the Weiss. Vandal tries to attack Livia and Angie, but Julius and the other 4 idiots stop him, and they delay enough for Leon to get there and fight him. And his armor is black and spiky with eyeballs all over it, and generally it just looks pretty creepy. So they start fighting, and Vandal decides to go after the ship, and him and the 5 idiots protect Angie and Livia and Marie. The ship still starts to sink after a magic fireball attack from the demon suit, and he goes after the Black Knight by himself, and the land giant shows up because Gertrude summoned it. So we cut, and it goes back in time a little bit, and Gertrude's crying over her sister, and some noble douchebag is lecturing her, and essentially tells her that they used her and they killed her parents for being useless as well. So she uses the flute to order a bunch of monsters to kill the guy, and he gets torn to shreds. And then she summons the Land Guardian. We cut to Balkus, who's Leon's dad, and he runs off to join the fight after the giant shows up, ordering Nyx to stay behind because he's the heir now. Leon and the Black Knight have a duel until the giant shows up, and the partner is being attacked by the Phanos fleet, so there isn't anyone to deal with the giant, and eventually the partner sinks. Luxian makes it back and helps Leon in his duel with the Black Knight, and Luxian brings Schwert, which is the air bite that Luxian customized. It was a gift from Clarice to Leon, and it combines with Arrogans to make him way stronger. So it's like essentially a power-up for his armor when Luxian uses it in a specific way because he customized it. We go to chapter 11, called The Power of Love. So the Weiss sank, but a rescue ship managed to get Angie, Livia, and Marie, and they decided to go to Gertrude and try to get her to play the flute again to stop the giant. So they get to where she is on the deck of the ship. They ask her to call off the giant, and she's kind of snapped because of her sister, so she's a little bit crazy and unstable right now. And she tells them flat out the cost of summoning a guardian is your life. And Marie says maybe not if you call it off. And she acknowledges that this might be an option. Livia tries to say that her sister wouldn't have wanted this, and Marie goes off on Olivia about her speaking when she doesn't actually know how Hertrauda feels, or Gertrude. Livia, Marie, and Angie all get into this huge argument about it, and Marie, defending Gertrude, ends up making her play the flute again and surrendering. And Vandal comes back and says that he'll never surrender, and he tries to kill Olivia because she's too powerful. So Leon shows up and stops it, And when we cut to Leon, Luxian explains that the demonic suit has taken Vandal over, so he's gone crazy. They have another duel where they both damage each other a lot, and Leon rips off the demonic arm of the suit, and Luxian destroys it. Leon decides to blow away the giant with all the power that Arrogans has, and we see this sort of magnified version of Leon's one magic spell that he uses, where a shitload of magic circles form and stack on top of one another, and he launches this at the giant. And I'm pretty sure that you're supposed to infer that it doesn't regenerate this time because Hertrude called it off. So we see Vandal die. He's the one who is watching Arrogans blow up the giant. And then Arrogans collapses and falls down to the lake below. Luxian uses a flotation device, so Leon is just floating in the cockpit in the water on Arrogans. He asks Luxian if he made the right choices and says he feels guilty about how many people have died. And Leon blames himself for the war, but Luxian says his opinion of himself is too high, and that a war would have happened regardless because wars have always happened with humans. And he says that he can retrieve and fix the partner, but the Weiss is dangerous and would make Olivia and Angie targets, so he doesn't want to do that. So eventually a rescue ship lands nearby, and Olivia and Angie are crying, and Luxian tells Leon that he needs to make his mind up because he loves both of them, and Leon admits it. Angie asks why he ran away after the incident with the ship. He says that he didn't want to get in the way of them because they love each other, so they both get mad at him. We go back to the capital, and Leon pretty much says that because Hertrude surrendered, everything wraps up pretty quickly. And he's surrounded by women who will be in the academy next year, but they haven't been there yet, so they're not tainted assholes yet. And he's telling them about how much of a hero he is, and he's just being a total douchebag. Mylene shows up to explain to him the full situation in Holfort, and that's where the chapter ends. So chapter 12 is called The Cruel Truth. Mylene explains that essentially the nobles wouldn't stop rebelling, so the academy was created to demonstrate the power of the capital without battle. And she also explains that because so many men died during the war, that there was actually a shortage of men, and women have a really hard time getting married after they leave the academy. And they instilled this value in the academy, which was essentially insane favoritism of the women, and this was to undermine the men's brashness and to stop rebellions from happening. But the women went far crazier and became far more arrogant than they could have imagined. So this ends up draining the nobles financially, mentally, and all of their wealth is funneling to the capital. So this was sort of the nobility's strategy to stop uprisings. The long-term goal of the academy was to get the commoners educated, which is why Olivia was brought in, and then eventually nobles would no longer even be needed. And Leon starts to panic that they're going to get rid of him for finding all this information out. But instead, Mylene asks him for a favor, which is to save Julius as his mother, not as the prince or the queen. And this conversation is actually quite a bit longer in the book, but this is pretty much the summary of it, if you're interested in, reading the whole thing yourself. So we cut, and Marie, Julius, Jill, Brad, Chris, and Greg are all in the dungeons. Leon shows up with Hertrude, who's no longer Princess Hertrude, in tow. Julius attacked Hertrude right after the treaty was signed, which is why they're in prison. And he did it because the treaty was unfair and he would have had to marry into a Phanos family. And the other four drove out the temple officials who came to fetch Marie because some of them tried to poison her. And Leon had actually arranged for the temple to only take the holy items. And then after the poisoning incident, Leon had leverage, but then those four went on a rampage with the armors and screwed it up. Hertrude invites Leon to come to Phanos with her, and he declines. She mutters that she was actually being genuine this time, but he still turned her down. So Leon goes to the king and offers money and a bunch of other stuff in exchange for their lives. The king tries to blame Leon for the loss of the royal ship, and they decide that they need to be sent off on their own island out in the middle of nowhere while things cool down. So they ask if Leon would offer one of his. Leon says fine, and they ask him why, and he says that he just can't leave him alone. And Minister Bernard, who is Clarice's dad, says the prince made a good friend in Leon. And Leon says he wants to give away all the titles and just retire to a small island, which they accept because they think he doesn't have the lost items anymore, even though we know that they've been recovered and repaired. So we cut, and Leon is with Luxian, and he's a little bit bummed out about the island because this is where he was trying to harvest his rice. but he's also glad to be retiring. Livia bursts into his room and says it's not fair that he's losing all of his titles and stuff. She tells him that Angie and her prostrated themselves in front of Marie to try to save him, and now it's causing all kinds of problems for Angie. So we go to Angie and her dad Vincent, who's pissed off at her, and he's saying that she denigrated the house name, and now Leon has lost all the standing that he had, and Angie asks if he wants her to take her own life because she made the house look bad. And her dad says that he can't have her in his house, and he's arranged a marriage for her. She doesn't really seem to care, and her dad explains that the man she's marrying is an idiot knight who gave up all of his titles, ranking, and territory, and wants to retire young. Obviously, he's referring to Leon, and he says that the Redgrave house will look after both of them, and that Livia will be treated as an official mistress. So their conversation is interrupted by her brother Gilbert about Leon, and we cut, and Leon is having a complete meltdown and trying to behead Marie in her jail cell for humiliating Angie and Olivia. Angie and Olivia come in and tell him to knock it off, and he says he's going to give her head to them as a gift, and they refuse. Mylene and the 5 aides show up to stop him, and he's still furious. So they start a scuffle, and Leon tells Luxian to use his attack, and he electrocutes all 6 of them, and Leon gets knocked out. And when he wakes up, he's with Mylene, Angie, and Olivia, and they're all annoyed, and he explains that he's pissed off because he just found out about the stuff in public, about the public humiliation. So we go to chapter 13, which is called Game Complete. Marie is complaining about living in the country in the middle of nowhere and says she's a city girl and stuff. And her and Leon start a sibling argument about whose fault it is that this world is so messed up now. And Marie blames him for being close to Angie and Olivia, and he blames her for taking the saint spot and going for the reverse harem route. And Luxian burns them both by saying that he pities their parents for being stuck with 2 children like them. Luxian's great. Luxian roasts him again and says that Marie's daughter would be crying right now if she saw that she seduced 5 men, 6 if you include Kyle, and that Leon keeps running from Angie and Olivia who've confessed to him. And then we get a flashback where Angie and Olivia summon Leon up to the garden rooftop in the palace, and Angie confesses, and Leon meets Clear. Olivia says that she still loves him as much as she did before, and they ask to hear his answer, even if his answer is rejection. And he says that he loves them both, and they both smack him in the face. We cut to Luxian, who's calling him a scumbag, and Marie also is calling him a scumbag. And Leon says, "Oh, is the woman with 5 boyfriends calling me a scumbag?" So he thinks he's done the game because he's completed it, and Marie gives him a confused look, and we'll find out right at the end of the book why. A few days later at the Capitol Cemetery, there are people mourning the ones who died. Mylene is riding alone with Leon in a carriage, and they're on their way to the last ceremony. And the prior gap was filled by the gap in time between what we saw in this few days was just parties and ceremonies and whatever. So this ceremony is to remove Leon's titles and to get his rewards. And the plan was just to remove them slowly over time, because they can't just strip him of all his titles at once. So we cut to him with his family, and Balkus, his dad, is getting an upper 6th ranking for his part in the battle, which is a pretty big deal. We find out Zola and her son Rutart have lost all their titles because they fled. His sister Jenna is at home sulking about her dad beheading Mjolnir. And we go to this big fancy ceremony in the audience chamber, and instead of getting demoted, Leon gets promoted to an earl and a lower 3rd court ranking, which is pretty much the highest that he can be without being royalty or a minister of some kind. The king gives Leon this shit-eating grin after he does it, and their relationship is really antagonistic, and it's really funny. And we cut to his family's room in the palace, and Leon's losing his mind with his parents over this promotion, and his parents are discussing if they should be more formal with him since he's an earl, and he's really mad because the higher title you have, the more you have to contribute to the kingdom. Money, ships, land, resources, whatever. So we cut, and Angie is called up to him and is like, what the hell happened? And he's mad because the king did this on his own, and he can tell because everyone else looks surprised. So Angie says that maybe he should marry into another family, and that they could take care of the resource issues. Clarice and Deirdre show up, and Deirdre offers him a branch house of the Roseblade family, and Leon uses this bickering between the three girls to run away, and he runs into Olivia, who's on the ground because she's not used to the formal wear and she fell, and the king is offering to give her a hand to get her up and hitting on her. So Leon confronts him, and the king says that he can't treat the hero who saved the country poorly, or it would make him look bad, which is why he promoted him. So Leon bitches, and the king says that he loathes him, so he can't do something that will bring him any joy. And he says that he has a grudge because Leon stole the spotlight before the battle started, and it was supposed to be the king's moment to shine. And this is what I was referring to when I said this, that his "if that is what your majesty desires" line will bite him in the ass. And he said, the king says that Leon was supposed to get all flustered, and then he could show off. And then Leon came back with that line, and then he went off on the marquee and stole all the attention, so the king was pissed off. Leon asks if beating his ass would get him a demotion because that's the only way he can lose his titles. And the king says it'll get you an execution. Mylene shows up and Leon grabs onto the king before the king can run away and says that the king's threatening him and threatening to have him executed. So please save me. And Livia wants a proper answer from him regarding their feelings. And he says he can't return her feelings. And in his head, he's thinking to himself that he's not good enough. So we get to the epilogue, and the epilogue's pretty high quality. And this is kind of what wraps up this arc and the first arc in the story. So Leon is on one of his islands for spring break, and Luxian has created a ship with a horn and named it Einhorn because it represents the palace. Claire is in the capital with Angie and Livia, and the new ship is supposed to represent Holfort because Leon is going to study abroad. So we go to that part where Marie had a weird look on her face that Leon thought the game was done, and Marie tells him that there's multiple installments to the game. The second being in another country called the Alzur Republic. And in the flashback, Marie explains that her Trauda, the second princess of Thanos, was actually from the third installment of the game, and Julius's younger brother also shows up in the third installment of the game as well. The second game is in the Alzur Republic, and this is where the next 4 books take place, if you're interested. So Marie wants financial support in exchange for information about the second and third game, because the 5 idiots don't understand money, and she's got all that debt from her parents, and she's just fucking broke. Marie says that if the protagonist fails to romance one of the love options in the second game, that the entire world is in danger, so Leon feels obligated to go. They're also weary that there could be other reincarnated people like them who are going to fuck things up. So Nyx comes in and tells Leon that their dad wants him, and he finds out that they're having an engagement ceremony. His dad explains that the roles have reversed between men and women, so it's not for Jenna, because she doesn't even have any options. And his dad says that he has to attend this ceremony before he leaves the country. So naturally, Leon assumes that this engagement ceremony is for Nyx. We cut, and we see Jenna's learning how to be a housewife from Eumeria, and she's really bad at it. So Leon makes fun of her and tells her that no one's going to marry her right now as she is unless she's nicer. We cut, and Luxian and Leon are talking in his room that night before the engagement ceremony, and Luxian asks who he's going to choose between Angie and Olivia. And he says, I don't know because I care about both of them, and he would feel bad picking one unless he's going to commit to marrying them. So the next day, they're all getting ready for the ceremony, and Leon thinks it's weird that he looks fancier than Nyx, and his dad says it's just because of his title that he has to look fancy. Balkus says that he can meet the bride's family after the ceremony. So when we go outside, as you might expect, Duke Redgrave is in the audience, and there are 2 girls at the altar. Angie and Olivia are waiting for him at the end of the aisle. His dad wants things resolved between them before he goes to another country, and tells Leon that he's wishy-washy. Luxian was in on this setup along with Clear, so Leon's pissed off at them too. Balkus says that Leon will make the Duke look bad if he refuses. So Gilbert, because Leon kind of froze, so Gilbert, Angie's brother, comes up and says that Angie and her friend are waiting, or is Angie not good enough for you? Obviously Leon says that she's plenty good enough. And Balkus tells Leon that he's been getting marriage requests from women ranging from the age of over 50 all the way to girls that haven't even hit puberty yet. And Gilbert says that if he accepts the engagement, he won't have to deal with all that nonsense. He also says that they consulted the king beforehand, and he happily blessed it. And Leon gets a letter from the king. I'm going to read verbatim because their interactions just crack me up. So the letter says, "Welcome to life's graveyard. I heard about how you kept running from marriage, so I did everything in my power to guide things along so you could get married to those two. Feel free to weep tears of gratitude at my benevolence. Fondest regard, your highly talented and marvelous king." So Leon finally starts walking down the aisle, and his mom says that she can't believe her useless son has been blessed with 2 wonderful fiancés. So Leon's just getting fucking burned by everybody in this book. And they have a pretty nice conversation at the altar where Leon keeps thinking to himself that Angie is swoon-worthy. He says, "You might get fed up and wish you'd never gone through with this." Olivia says that won't happen. Leon says, "I'm an earl, but I don't bring in much money." Angie says that she'll support him, don't worry. She's the daughter of a duke, and her house is promised to supply whatever she needs for her independence. And with her education, she can earn enough money for all of them. She also says if you want to run, there's the door. Leon says even if he did, only hell awaits. And then he asks what made them even fall for a guy like him in the first place. Angie says, "I fell because you're you. I want you, Leon. Be my husband." Olivia says that they love him because of who he is. And she won't let go no matter what happens. And he thinks to himself, that's a little yandere, but he still likes it. And he says that he's not going to run anywhere anymore. Leon is mad at Luxian and Clear for teaming up to deceive him, and Clear says that because of his status as a hero, maybe he can have his own harem if he wants. So we cut, Leon's in his room, Angie and Olivia show up in their pajamas, and they just want to talk, and Leon's disappointed obviously because he wanted something else. And we get a nice little joke here where he thinks to himself, and he says, "I put my arms around them, and we all talked late into the night. It was torture." But I think he means torture because he wanted more and had to control himself. His friends Daniel, Raymond, Clarice, and Deirdre come to see him off as he leaves for Alzur, the Alzur Republic. Clarice and Deirdre both say that their houses would welcome him if he changes his mind. And his tea master also comes to say bye. Clear is with Angie and Olivia back in the room, and they say that they already said their goodbyes and that they didn't want to cry in front of everyone and make things harder on him. And they suspect him of hiding something and say that they want to grow so that he can actually rely on them. And they get pretty excited when they find out that they can send messages to Leon through Clear and Luxian, even though he'll be so far away. Leon is on his boat throwing a tantrum, and a gift from the palace is on his ship, and the gift is Marie and the 5 idiots, and they're going with him because they wasted all their money to build a statue of Marie out in front of the mansion that he gave them. Marie says that Mylene tore into her about the 5 idiots, and he got a letter from the king that just says, make sure you deal with these troublemakers. He got a letter from Mylene that also says that this was for their protection because a lot of people were still pissed off. Gertrude also sent a letter saying maybe if she had gotten him to her side, things would have turned out differently. And this is where the story ends, with him on his way to the Alzur Republic. There is also like a little bonus chapter about Gertrude and Hertrauda, but I don't really care about that. It's only like 3 pages anyway. So yeah, that's it for the book. Obviously, there's more books. I think the reason that I like this book so much is because the series really could end here. And I think it would be a completely... I think there's closure if you wanted to end the story here. Kind of your happily ever after with both girls, and he's an earl and things just work out for him. But using the idea that there's multiple installations of this game for there to be sequels is a pretty smart way to do it. So yeah, this is the conclusion of the first arc. We get resolution between Leon and Marie, both being resurrected brother and sister. His relationship with Angie and Olivia is solidified now. His status has gone through the roof since the series started. And I'll be honest, I don't usually like harem stuff, but I think it works here because Olivia and Angie cared so much about each other first. And this is also a world where all the women had harems to begin with. And he's essentially royalty now. So I think it makes sense that, you would have like your political wife and then also your concubines and shit. Although it's not as unsavory as that in this situation because all 3 of them care about each other a lot. But yeah, I really enjoy this book. I think it's really funny. I think it's a great way to conclude the first game. I've already gone pretty long, so I'm not going to keep rambling. But the first season covered 2 books, like I said. The first book is episodes 1 to 5. The second is 6 to 12. I think if they're going to do a season 2, that it would make the most sense to put this book as the entire season. Because if you go past this book, then you have to go to the second arc. And unless you're for sure going to do a third season, there's not really a clean place to end it. You could do the first book of the second arc and it kind of end there, but it's right in the middle of the story, so it really would be a bad spot for the anime to end in total. I don't know if it's going to get a second season. I'm assuming not. Yeah, so like I said, the next arc is the second installation of the game. It's in the Alzur Republic. It's 4 books. I enjoyed that arc as well. I'm really hoping that the series concludes in the next few books. It's on book 10 right now, in the Japanese version at least. You know, if you enjoyed the anime and you're curious to see where the story goes, I would definitely recommend reading the books. It doesn't look like the manga is even going to catch up to where this book is for a couple years, maybe longer. I mean, obviously with monthly manga, even if each chapter covers a lot, it just doesn't come out that fast. But yeah, I thought this was a great first season of the show. I love the books. It's been one of my favorite series that I've read recently. And that's it for this book. Hopefully we'll get a season 2 and we can see all this stuff animated. All right. Thanks. See ya.